A 7-year-old girl ran across the parking lot screaming at a massive biker covered in tattoos. She grabbed his leather vest with both hands and wouldn't let go. The man looked down at this tiny child, confused, until she said the 5 words that made his blood run cold. "Don't start your bike. He tampered with it." The little girl stood there, shaking, her pink backpack hanging off one shoulder, tears streaming down her face. She'd been hiding behind a car for 20 minutes, waiting for the biker to come out of the diner. Her name was Sophie Martinez, and she'd watched a man in a business suit spend 15 minutes under the biker's Harley with tools. She didn't know what he'd done, but she knew it was bad. Her father had been a mechanic before he died. He'd taught her that you never touch another man's bike. Ever. The biker's name was Marcus Reaper Hayes, president of the Desert Kings MC. He was 6'3", 260 pounds of muscle and scars, with a gray beard that reached his chest. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. But this little girl had run straight to him, like he was her last hope. "What do you mean, tampered?" Marcus asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "A man," Sophie whispered. "He was under your motorcycle. He had tools. He kept looking around to make sure nobody saw him. He loosened something. I don't know what, but I saw him do it. My daddy used to fix bikes. He said if someone touches your bike, they're trying to hurt you." Marcus felt ice spread through his veins. He looked at his Harley, sitting innocently in the parking space. Then he looked at the child again. "Where's your mama, sweetheart?" "Inside. She's paying for breakfast. I told her I needed to use the bathroom, but I snuck out. I had to warn you." Marcus looked down at his bike. If someone had tampered with the brakes, he'd find out at 70 miles per hour on the highway. If they'd cut a fuel line, he could catch fire. If they'd loosened critical bolts, the bike could fall apart under him. Any of those scenarios meant death. He pulled out his phone and hit speed dial. "Diesel, get the crew to Rosie's Diner right now and bring your toolkit. Someone tried to kill me." Within 10 minutes, 8 bikers pulled into the parking lot, their engines rumbling like thunder. Marcus pointed at his Harley. "Little girl here says someone was under my bike with tools. I need eyes on everything before I touch that machine." Diesel Martinez dropped to his knees beside the motorcycle, his practiced hands moving over every component. The other bikers formed a protective circle around Sophie, who watched with wide eyes. These giant men in leather and chains were treating her like she was made of glass. Diesel's voice cut through the tension. "Brake line. Someone cut it halfway through. You'd have made it maybe 2 miles before it snapped completely. At highway speed, you'd be dead before you hit the ground." The parking lot went silent. Every biker understood what that meant. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't vandalism. This was attempted murder. Marcus knelt down to Sophie's level. "Sweetheart, you just saved my life. Can you tell me what the man looked like?" "He was wearing a suit, gray suit, white shirt. He had dark hair, really short, and glasses. He kept checking his phone while he worked, like he was following instructions or something." "How old?" "Like my teacher, maybe 40. Marcus nodded slowly. "You're very brave. Most kids would have been too scared to say anything." "My daddy said bikers are the good guys. He said if I ever needed help, find someone with a leather vest because they protect people." One of the bikers, a man called Snake with arms like tree trunks, wiped his eyes. "Kid's got a smart daddy." "Had," Sophie said quietly. "He died last year. Motorcycle accident. Someone ran a red light." The bikers exchanged glances. This little girl had watched her father die on a bike, and instead of running away from motorcycles, she'd run toward one to save a stranger's life. That took courage most adults didn't have. Marcus stood up, his jaw tight. "Diesel, fix my brake line. I want security footage from every camera in this parking lot. Snake, go inside and find out if anyone remembers a man in a gray suit. The rest of you spread out. He might still be watching." A woman burst out of the diner, panic on her face. "Sophie! Sophie!" She spotted her daughter surrounded by bikers and froze, her hand going to her mouth. "It's okay, ma'am," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Your daughter just saved my life. She's a hero." Mrs. Martinez ran to Sophie, pulling her into a fierce hug. "What were you thinking? You can't just run off like that. I was terrified." "Mom, he was going to die," Sophie said, her voice small. "Just like Daddy. I couldn't let that happen again." The words hit every biker in the chest like a hammer. This child had been traumatized by watching her father's death, and instead of freezing, she'd acted. She'd put herself between a stranger and the same fate. Mrs. Martinez looked at the bikers, really looked at them for the first time. She saw the concern on their faces, the way they'd positioned themselves protectively around her daughter. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for listening to her." "Ma'am," Marcus said, "your daughter has more courage than most grown men I know. She spotted attempted murder and did something about it. We owe her our lives." A young biker called Flash pulled up security footage on his phone. "Boss, got something. Gray suit, early 40s, left in a black Mercedes 15 minutes ago. Plates are visible." Marcus studied the footage. The man's face was clear. He'd been sloppy, too confident that nobody would notice him. "Run those plates. I want to know who he is, where he works, and why he wants me dead." 10 minutes later, Flash had answers. "Anthony Brelin, works for Harmon Development Corporation. They're the company trying to buy up properties on 3rd Street. Marcus felt the pieces click together. 3rd Street. That's where the Desert Kings clubhouse sat. Right in the middle of a block of properties Harmon wanted to redevelop into luxury condos. They'd offered to buy the clubhouse. Marcus had refused. They'd offered more money. He'd refused again. Now they were trying to remove the obstacle permanently. "Attempted murder over real estate," Snake spat. "That's cold." "It gets worse," Flash said, scrolling through his phone. "Harmon's CEO is Charles Brelin, Anthony's father. This company has a history of pushing people out. There are 6 complaints filed with the city about intimidation tactics. Nothing ever sticks because Charles Brelin owns half the city council." Marcus looked at Sophie, who was clutching her mother's hand, watching the bikers with wide eyes. This little girl had just exposed a conspiracy that went far beyond one attempted murder. If this story touched your heart, hit that like and subscribe button to support more stories about the people who protect those who can't protect themselves. Mrs. Martinez's phone rang. She answered it, and her face went white. "What? When? I'm on my way." She hung up and looked at Marcus with terror in her eyes. "That was my landlord. Someone just served me an eviction notice. 30 days to vacate. He said Harmon Development bought the building and they're clearing everyone out." The parking lot went silent. This wasn't coincidence. Harmon had connected Mrs. Martinez to Marcus, probably through security footage or witnesses. Now they were retaliating against her for interfering with their plan. "How many units in your building?" Marcus asked. 62. All low-income families. Where are we supposed to go?" Marcus's face hardened. "Nowhere. You're not going anywhere. Diesel, call our lawyer. Snake, get me the contact information for every news station in the city. Flash, I want detailed records of every property Harmon has acquired in the last 5 years and every complaint filed against them." "What are you going to do?" Mrs. Martinez asked. "What we do best, protect people." Over the next 3 days, the Desert Kings turned their clubhouse into a war room. They interviewed every family in Mrs. Martinez's building. They discovered that Harmon had been systematically buying properties, evicting low-income residents, and building luxury developments. They'd displaced over 300 families in 2 years. City inspectors who questioned their methods mysteriously lost their jobs. Activists who protested found themselves facing bogus legal charges. The Martinez family stayed at the clubhouse for their safety. Sophie spent her afternoons doing homework at the bar while bikers helped with her math problems. She drew pictures of motorcycles and showed them to Marcus, who had them framed and hung on the clubhouse walls. But Marcus knew they needed more than evidence. They needed proof that Harmon was willing to kill to get what they wanted. That meant going deeper, asking harder questions, and putting themselves at risk. Snake volunteered to go undercover at one of Harmon's current construction sites. He showed up with fake credentials, claiming to be a welder looking for work. The site foreman hired him on the spot. They were always short on workers because the conditions were so dangerous. For 2 weeks, Snake worked 12-hour days on the site, documenting everything. Safety equipment that didn't meet code, electrical systems that were fire hazards, structural supports that were undersized. He wore a hidden camera in his hard hat and recorded supervisors ordering workers to cut corners. "Just get it done," one supervisor said. "Corporate doesn't care how we do it, just that it's finished on schedule. Anyone who complains can find another job." Snake also talked to the other workers during breaks. Most were undocumented immigrants who couldn't report violations without risking deportation. They worked in constant fear. Fear of injury, fear of losing their jobs, fear of speaking up. One worker, a man named Carlos who'd been at the site for 8 months, pulled Snake aside during lunch. "You seem like a good guy. So I'm going to tell you something. Get out of here. This company doesn't care if we live or die. 3 guys have been seriously hurt since I started. One lost his hand to a faulty power saw. Another fell 2 stories because they gave us broken harnesses. The company paid them cash to keep quiet and disappeared them. If you value your life, find different work." Snake reported back to Marcus with hours of footage and testimony from terrified workers. But they still needed the smoking gun. Proof that Harmon was directly responsible for deaths, not just accidents. That proof came 4 days later when Diesel found something that changed everything. "Boss," Diesel said, his voice shaking, "you need to see this." He showed Marcus a file he'd pulled from city records. A construction worker named Ramon Ortiz had died 18 months ago at a Harmon development site. The official report called it an accident, a crane malfunction. But Ramon's widow had filed a wrongful death suit, claiming the safety equipment had been deliberately sabotaged. The case had been dismissed after Charles Breslin's lawyers buried her in legal motions she couldn't afford to fight. "I talked to Mrs. Ortiz," Diesel continued. "She said Ramon had complained about unsafe practices at the site. He said he was going to report Harmon to OSHA. He died the next day. The crane operator who supposedly made the mistake, he disappeared a week after the accident and was never seen again." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. "They've done this before. They killed Ramon to silence him." Diesel nodded. "I went deeper. Found the crane operator's name, Victor Mendoza. He'd worked in construction for 20 years, perfect safety record. Then suddenly he makes a mistake that kills someone and disappears? I tracked down his sister in Phoenix. She says Victor called her the night before he disappeared. He was terrified. Said someone from Harmon had paid him $50,000 to sabotage the crane, and now they wanted him gone so he couldn't testify. She never heard from him again." "They killed him too," Snake said, "to cover up the first murder." "There's more," Flash said, pulling up more files on his laptop. "I found 3 other suspicious deaths connected to Harmon properties over the last 5 years. A building inspector named David Chen, who died in a hit-and-run 2 days after he issued a stop work order on a Harmon site. An environmental consultant named Sarah Jennings, who had a heart attack at 32 with no previous health issues. She'd just completed a report showing Harmon was illegally dumping construction waste. A tenant organizer named Marcus Thompson, who supposedly committed suicide by jumping off a building. The same week he was scheduled to testify before the city council about Harmon's intimidation tactics. Flash turned his laptop to show photos of the dead. Young faces, full of life, cut down in their prime. I talked to their families. Every single one of them said the same thing. Their loved one had been threatened by Harmon representatives. They'd been offered money to back off. When they refused, they died. 5 murders, Snake said quietly. That we know about, all to clear the way for luxury condos. Marcus studied the faces on the screen. These weren't just statistics. They were people with families, with dreams, with lives that mattered. Ramon Ortiz had 2 kids who'd grow up without their father. David Chen's wife was 7 months pregnant when he died. Sarah Jennings had been days away from her wedding. And Victor Mendoza? His sister said he'd been saving money to bring his mother over from Mexico. Instead, he'd been paid to commit murder and then murdered himself to keep him quiet. We need more, Marcus said. We need someone inside Harmon to flip. Someone who can testify about what really happened. That someone turned out to be Anthony Breslin's assistant, a young woman named Jessica Torres, who'd been with the company for 3 years. Flash found her through social media. She'd posted cryptic messages about hating her job and not being able to sleep at night. Marcus and Diesel met her at a coffee shop far from Harmon's offices. She was 26, looked exhausted, and jumped every time the door opened. I shouldn't be here, she said immediately. If they find out I'm talking to you. You're safe, Marcus said gently. We just want to know the truth. Jessica's hands shook as she held her coffee cup. I've typed the emails. I've scheduled the meetings. I've seen the payments to city officials, to police officers, to the people who make problems disappear. Anthony doesn't even try to hide it from me because he knows I'm too scared to talk. What about his father? Diesel asked. Charles is worse. He's the one who gives the orders. Anthony just carries them out. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling. I've been saving everything. Emails, text messages, financial records. I have proof of bribes, proof of threats, proof that they knew about the safety violations and ordered workers to ignore them. I even have the email where Charles authorized the payment to Victor Mendoza to sabotage the crane that killed Ramon Ortiz. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. Why haven't you gone to the police? Because half the police force is on Harmon's payroll, Jessica's voice cracked. I tried. I went to a detective I thought I could trust. 2 days later, Anthony called me into his office and showed me surveillance photos of me meeting with that detective. He said if I ever talked to law enforcement again, they'd make sure I had an accident, just like they did to the others. They threatened you, Snake said. They threatened my family. I have 2 younger sisters in high school. Anthony showed me their school schedule, their walking route home, their social media accounts. He said they'd make it look like gang violence. Who would question 2 Hispanic girls getting killed in the wrong neighborhood? The rage in Marcus's chest turned into something colder, sharper. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was terrorism. Harmon was holding an entire city hostage with fear and violence. Give us the files, Marcus said. We'll make sure they can't touch you or your family. How? You're bikers. No offense, but what can you do against a billion-dollar company? Marcus smiled, and it wasn't friendly. We're very good at protecting people, and we have resources you don't know about. Trust me. Jessica looked at each of them, these massive men in leather and chains who somehow made her feel safer than anyone else had in months. She nodded and handed over her phone. Everything's on there. Passwords are in the Notes app. Flash immediately started downloading and backing up the files. This is gold. Email chains between Charles and city council members. Wire transfers to offshore accounts. And look at this. A text message from Anthony to his father the day before he tampered with Marcus's bike. Desert King's president won't sell. Need to handle it like we did Chen and Ortiz. That's premeditated murder in writing, Diesel said. They're done. But Marcus knew it wasn't that simple. Harmon had bought protection at every level. They needed to expose this so publicly, so completely, that even their paid allies couldn't save them. We need the FBI, Marcus said, but not the local field office. They might be compromised too. We go straight to the regional director with everything. Over the next week, the Desert Kings became investigators. They compiled Jessica's files with Snake's undercover footage and flashes research into previous deaths. They tracked down every worker who'd been injured on Harmon sites and convinced them to give statements. They found Victor Mendoza's sister and helped her file a missing person report with federal authorities. And they prepared for war, because Harmon wasn't going to go quietly. The first sign of trouble came when someone tried to burn down the Desert King's clubhouse at 3 a.m. Fortunately, Diesel was working late in the garage and spotted the arsonist, a hired thug who broke when faced with 8 angry bikers. "Brelin paid me $10,000, the man sobbed, said to torch the place and make sure nobody could trace it back to him. The second attempt was more direct. 4 men in suits showed up at the clubhouse with guns, claiming they were there to deliver a message from Charles Brelin. The message never got delivered because 23 bikers happened to be having a meeting that night. The suited men found themselves disarmed, cable-tied, and sitting on the floor while Marcus called the real police. The few cops he knew weren't on Harmon's payroll. "You're making a mistake," one of the men said. "Mr. Brelin owns this city. You can't win." "We already won," Marcus replied. "You just don't know it yet." Sophie walked into the room carrying a glass of water for her mother. She looked at the photos on the wall, the faces of the dead, the families they'd left behind. "Those people were killed?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus said gently. "Bad people hurt them." "Like they tried to hurt you?" "Exactly like that." Sophie stared at the wall for a long moment. Then she looked up at Marcus with eyes that held too much understanding for a 7-year-old. "Are you going to stop them?" "Yes," Marcus promised. "We're going to stop them." But stopping Harmon wouldn't be easy. They had money, political connections, and a history of making problems disappear. The Desert Kings needed a plan that would expose them so completely that even their bought politicians couldn't protect them. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Martinez, who'd been quietly listening to the bikers' plan, spoke up. "I used to work in public relations before my husband died. You need media coverage, but not local news. They're probably in Harmon's pocket. You need national attention, something so big they can't ignore it." Marcus looked at her with new respect. "What did you have in mind?" "A protest. But not just any protest. You get every family Harmon has displaced, every worker who's been exploited, every person who's been threatened. You put them all in one place with signs and banners telling their stories. Then you invite every national news outlet in the country, make it impossible for Harmon to hide." "They'll send the police," Snake warned. "Let them," Mrs. Martinez said. "The optics of police removing crying children and elderly people from a peaceful protest? That's headline news. And while everyone's focused on the protest, you release all your evidence to journalists who'll actually investigate." Marcus smiled for the first time in days. "You're good at this." "I learned from my husband. He fought for workers' rights his whole life. Before the accident, he was organizing mechanics to demand better safety standards." Her voice broke. He would have loved knowing his daughter saved a biker's life. Sophie hugged her mother, and several bikers had to turn away and wipe their eyes. The protest was scheduled for Saturday morning outside Harmon Development's corporate headquarters. Marcus didn't know how many people would show up. They'd spread the word through community organizations, tenant groups, and social media. They'd contacted every family Harmon had displaced, every worker who'd been exploited, every person who'd been threatened. Mrs. Martinez worked around the clock, coordinating with national media. She reached out to investigative journalists she'd known from her PR days, offering them an exclusive story about corporate murder and corruption. She contacted documentary filmmakers who specialized in exposing corporate crime. She even got a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter from the New York Times interested in covering the protest. "This is bigger than just Harmon," she told Marcus. "This is about every corporation that thinks they can kill people and buy their way out of consequences. If we do this right, we change how these companies operate nationwide." The Desert Kings spent the week before the protest, providing security for people who'd agreed to testify. Mrs. Ortiz received death threats after word got out that she was speaking at the protest. The bikers moved her and her children to a safe house and stationed guards around the clock. Jessica Torres went into hiding with her sisters. 4 bikers escorted them everywhere, to school, to work, to the grocery store. Jessica was terrified, but she was also determined. Ramon Ortiz had kids the same age as my sisters, she told Marcus. If I don't speak up, someone else's family will be destroyed. I have to do this. For them. For all of them. The workers from the construction sites were hardest to convince. Most were undocumented and feared deportation more than death. But Carlos, the worker who'd warned Snake, stepped up. I'm tired of being afraid, he said. My daughter is 6 years old. She asked me last week why I always look sad. How do I tell her it's because I spend every day thinking this might be the day I die at work? If I don't stand up now, what kind of father am I? By Friday night, they had commitments from 400 people to attend the protest. But Marcus worried it wouldn't be enough. Harmon had billions of dollars and unlimited resources. What did they have? Courage and conviction. Would that be sufficient? Saturday morning answered that question. Marcus and the Desert Kings rolled up to Harmon's building at 5:30 a.m. to set up. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky orange and pink. They expected to be the first ones there. They weren't. 300 people were already waiting. Families holding signs, workers in hard hats carrying banners, elderly residents in wheelchairs, children holding photos of demolished homes. News vans from 6 different networks lined the street. Helicopters circled overhead. Mrs. Martinez had worked her media contacts, and they'd come through. This wasn't just local news. CNN was there, MSNBC, Fox News, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Al Jazeera, BBC. International media had picked up the story of the biker club taking on corporate corruption. By 6 a.m., the crowd had grown to 500. By 7, it was close to 1,000. People Marcus had never met were showing up with signs saying, "Harmon killed my father," and "Corporate greed, corporate murder, and hold them accountable." Sophie stood at the front of the crowd in a purple dress, holding a sign that said, "My daddy died, don't let yours." Next to her, Mrs. Ortiz held a photo of her late husband with the words, "Harmon killed my Ramon." Behind them stood the workers from Snake's construction site, 40 men and women in their work clothes, holding hard hats with the names of injured co-workers written on them. One man's hat said, "Juan, lost his arm." Another said, "Maria, paralyzed from falls." A third said, "Victor, missing since they killed Ramon." The families of David Chen, Sarah Jennings, and Marcus Thompson stood together holding photos of their murdered loved ones. They'd driven from different states, brought their children, told their stories to anyone who would listen. "My husband was going to expose them," Chen's widow said, tears streaming down her face while holding her 2-year-old daughter. He had evidence of illegal dumping, of bribes, of safety violations. The night before he was going to turn it in, a car ran him down and kept going. The police said it was a hit-and-run accident. But I know they killed him. A local news reporter shoved a microphone in her face. "Do you have proof?" "Now I do," she said, looking at Marcus. "These bikers found the proof my husband died for." At 8 a.m., Charles Brelin himself came out of the building, flanked by lawyers and private security. He took one look at the crowd and cameras and froze. His usual arrogant confidence cracked. This wasn't something he could make disappear with money or threats. "Mr. Brelin," a reporter from CNN shouted, "is it true your company has been linked to 5 suspicious deaths of workers and activists?" "No comment," Brelin snapped, trying to push through the crowd toward his waiting car. "What about the attempted murder of Marcus Hayes? We have footage of your son tampering with his motorcycle." Breslin's face went white. "That's preposterous. My son would never— We have the security footage, Mr. Breslin. Would you like to see it? The reporter pulled out a tablet and showed him the video. That's your son, isn't it? And here's a text message from his phone to yours, sent 1 hour before this footage. Desert King's president won't sell. Need to handle it like we did Chen and Ortiz. Would you care to explain that? Breslin looked around frantically. His lawyers were whispering urgently in his ears. His security guards were trying to create a path through the crowd, but there were too many people. The cameras were everywhere. Marcus stepped forward, his imposing figure drawing every camera. The crowd went quiet. Even the helicopters seemed to hover silently, waiting. Charles Breslin, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the plaza. You tried to kill me because I wouldn't sell my property. You've killed at least 5 other people who stood in your way. You've exploited workers, bribed officials, and displaced hundreds of families to build luxury condos that working people can't afford. You've poisoned our city with corruption. Today, that ends. You have no proof, Breslin said, but his voice shook. We have all the proof we need, Marcus replied. He handed a USB drive to the nearest reporter. Building inspection records showing code violations ignored. Financial records showing bribes to city officials. Communications between Breslin and contractors ordering problems to be handled. And testimony from 12 workers who were told to compromise safety to meet deadlines. The reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Breslin tried to retreat into the building, but FBI agents emerged from unmarked cars, blocking his path. Charles Breslin, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and fraud, the lead agent announced. Anthony Breslin is already in custody. The crowd erupted in cheers. Sophie ran to Marcus and hugged his leg. You did it! You stopped the bad guys! Marcus picked her up, this tiny girl who'd started everything, and held her high. No, sweetheart, you did it. You saw something wrong and spoke up. You're the real hero here. The cameras captured it all. The little girl in the purple dress, held aloft by the massive biker, surrounded by hundreds of people who'd been given their voices back. The trial lasted 6 months and became one of the most widely covered legal proceedings in state history. Every day, the courthouse steps were packed with protesters and media. Inside, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of a criminal enterprise that had operated for years with impunity. Jessica Torres testified for 3 days, walking through thousands of emails and financial documents. She explained how Charles Breslin had personally ordered the deaths of Ramon Ortiz and David Chen. She showed the jury text messages where Anthony Breslin discussed handling problems the way his father had taught him. They talked about murder like it was a business expense, she told the jury. Like human lives were just obstacles to profit margins. The defense tried to discredit her, claiming she was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. But then the prosecution called Mrs. Ortiz to the stand. She testified about the day Ramon died, how he'd come home the night before talking about safety violations he was going to report, how he'd kissed their children goodbye that morning, promising to take them to the park that weekend, how she'd gotten the call that afternoon that he was dead, killed by a crane that malfunctioned. The company offered me money to stay quiet, she said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. $50,000. They said it was for my children's future. But I told them my children's future was their father, and they'd taken that away. No amount of money would bring him back. I wanted justice, not a payoff. When Mrs. Chen testified about her husband's hit and run, the jury visibly reacted. When Carlos and the other construction workers described the deliberate safety violations and threats against anyone who complained, several jurors were wiping their eyes. But the moment that sealed Breslin's fate came when Sophie Martinez took the stand. She was 12 now, articulate and poised. She described watching her father die in a motorcycle accident when she was 6. She explained how that trauma had made her hyper-aware of danger, how she'd learned to notice when something was wrong. "I was waiting for my mom at the diner," Sophie said, her voice clear and strong. "I saw a man in a suit go under a motorcycle with tools. My daddy had taught me that you never touch someone else's bike, ever. So I watched to see what he was doing. He was there for 15 minutes. He kept checking his phone, looking around to make sure nobody saw him. When he left, I knew he'd done something bad." "Why didn't you tell your mother?" the prosecutor asked. "Because I knew the biker was about to come out and get on that motorcycle. There wasn't time. If I went to find my mom, he might start the engine before I could warn him. My daddy died because someone didn't check their bike. I couldn't let that happen to someone else." "So you approached this large, intimidating stranger?" "He wasn't intimidating," Sophie said simply. "He was a biker. My daddy said bikers are good people who protect others. I knew he'd listen." The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony. "Isn't it true your mother is friends with Mr. Hayes now? Haven't you spent considerable time at his motorcycle club? Couldn't this influence your testimony?" Sophie looked at the attorney with the same steady gaze she'd given Marcus that day in the parking lot. "My mother is friends with Mr. Hayes because he saved our lives. Harmon Development tried to evict us for stopping their murder plot. The Desert Kings protected us when nobody else would. If that influences my testimony, I'm glad. Because it means I know the difference between people who kill for money and people who risk their lives for strangers." The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge had to bang his gavel for order. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, Charles Brelin was found guilty on all counts. 5 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud, bribery, and corruption. The judge sentenced him to 30 years without parole. Anthony Brelin received 15 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. 12 city officials were indicted for accepting bribes. The police chief resigned in disgrace. 2 city council members went to prison. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge issued his ruling on the civil cases. Harmon Development Corporation was ordered to pay $200 million in damages to the victims' families and exploited workers. "This corporation operated with blatant disregard for human life," the judge said. "They treated people as disposable obstacles to profit. The only language such entities understand is financial consequences that threaten their existence. Therefore, in addition to criminal penalties, I am ordering the dissolution of Harmon Development Corporation. All assets will be liquidated, with proceeds going first to compensate victims, then to fund affordable housing initiatives in the communities Harmon destroyed." The courtroom exploded in cheers. Mrs. Ortiz collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Mrs. Chen hugged her daughter tight. Carlos and the construction workers stood and applauded. And Sophie, sitting in the front row between her mother and Marcus, smiled quietly. Justice had been served. Mrs. Ortiz received $4 million in settlement. She used part of it to establish a scholarship fund in Ramon's name for children of construction workers. The 3 other victims' families received similar amounts and created foundations to fight corporate corruption and protect worker safety. Mrs. Martinez and the 62 families in her building received new leases at protected rent rates. The new property owner was a non-profit formed by former Harmon victims. The non-profit bought 6 other buildings Harmon had owned, ensuring affordable housing would remain available for working families. The construction workers received back pay for safety violations and wage theft. Carlos used his settlement to bring his parents over from Mexico legally. He started his own construction company with worker-owned cooperative structure, ensuring safety standards were never compromised for profit. Jessica Torres entered witness protection for 6 months until it was confirmed that all threats against her had been neutralized. She eventually became an advocate for whistleblowers, helping others find the courage to expose corporate crime. The Desert King's clubhouse stayed exactly where it was, a monument to the power of standing your ground. But they added something new to the building. A mural on the side wall showing Sophie running across the parking lot, with the words, "Courage comes in all sizes," painted below. But the biggest changes happened in the lives of two people who'd met by chance in a parking lot. 5 years later, Sophie Martinez stood in that same parking lot outside Rosie's diner, but she wasn't 7 anymore. She was 12, and she wore a small leather vest with Honorary Desert King patched on the back. Marcus had given it to her on her 10th birthday. She came to the clubhouse 3 times a week now. The bikers helped with her homework, taught her to change oil, showed her how to fix motorcycles the way her father had. She was getting straight A's in school and wanted to be a civil rights lawyer when she grew up. "I want to help people the way you helped us," she'd told Marcus, "but with law instead of motorcycles." Marcus had never married, never had kids. But Sophie filled a space in his heart he hadn't known was empty. He taught her to ride a dirt bike when she turned 11. He went to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every award ceremony. Mrs. Martinez had long since stopped being surprised when this massive, scary-looking biker showed up at Sophie's school events and made other parents nervous until they saw how gentle he was with children. The Desert Kings had a new reputation now. They were still tough, still intimidating. But everyone in the city knew that if you needed help and had nowhere else to turn, you could go to them. They'd protected 6 other families from predatory developers. They'd shut down 2 corrupt construction companies. They'd helped 19 workers file successful safety complaints. And it all started because a 7-year-old girl remembered her father's words about bikers being the good guys. Today, Sophie sat at the bar in the clubhouse doing calculus homework while Diesel checked her answers. She'd grown tall, her father's features clear in her face. She wore her father's old mechanic's jacket. Too big, but she insisted on wearing it anyway. "Sophie," Marcus called. "Come here. Want to show you something?" He led her outside where a small motorcycle sat, freshly polished. Not a dirt bike this time. A real street bike, sized perfectly for a 12-year-old with training wheels that could be removed when she was ready. "Happy birthday," Marcus said. "It's a month early, but I figured you'd want time to practice before your actual birthday." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect." "Your dad would be proud of you," Marcus said quietly. "You've got his courage, his sense of justice, and you're going to do amazing things with your life." "Because you believed in me," Sophie said. "Because you all did." She walked over to the bike and ran her hand over the seat. Then she turned back to Marcus. "Thank you for everything, for listening to me that day, for protecting Mom, for being my family." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Thank you for saving my life, and for reminding us why we wear these vests. It's not about looking tough. It's about protecting people who need protection." Sophie hugged him, this massive man who'd become her guardian, her mentor, her friend. Around them, the other Desert Kings gathered, these rough men with soft hearts who'd proven that family isn't always blood. Mrs. Martinez pulled up in her car, now working as a community organizer helping families fight exploitation. She watched Sophie with the bikers and smiled. Her husband would have loved this. Their daughter, surrounded by men who understood that strength means protecting the weak, that courage means standing up to power, that family means showing up when it matters. That night, the clubhouse was full of laughter. Sophie showed off her new bike to the younger members. The older bikers told stories about her father, keeping his memory alive. Someone brought out a guitar. Someone else started cooking burgers. And on the wall, in a place of honor, hung 2 things. First, the security footage frame showing Sophie running across the parking lot to warn Marcus. And second, her original drawing from when she was 7. Stick figures of bikers on motorcycles with a little girl in the middle. Above the drawing, she'd written in purple crayon 5 years ago, "My heroes." Marcus stood looking at it, Snake beside him. "We did good, boss," Snake said quietly. "She did good," Marcus corrected. "We just followed her lead." Because sometimes the smallest person in the room is the bravest. Sometimes a 7-year-old girl with a pink backpack has more courage than grown men with guns. And sometimes the scariest-looking people on the street are the safest ones to run toward. The Desert Kings learned that the day Sophie Martinez ran across a parking lot to save a stranger's life. They'd spent years building a reputation for being tough, for being dangerous, for being men you didn't mess with. But one little girl reminded them of something more important. They were protectors. They were guardians. They were the people who showed up when everyone else looked away. And that's a reputation worth having. Sophie eventually did become a civil rights lawyer. She worked cases involving workers' rights, housing discrimination, and corporate corruption. She never forgot the lessons the Desert Kings taught her about standing up to power, about protecting the vulnerable, about being brave when fear tells you to stay silent. And on her law office wall, she kept that purple crayon drawing from when she was 7. A reminder that heroes don't always look like heroes. Sometimes they're covered in leather and tattoos and ride loud motorcycles that scare the neighbors. Sometimes they're exactly who you need when the world turns dangerous. Like and subscribe for more stories about the people who protect those who can't protect themselves.